that. Our chief correspondent, Peter Mansbridge, now joins us here in studio, and what a stunning
yeah, I'll say.
passing.
And you see it on all their faces, his combatants in politics. You just talked to Scott Bryson, and he looks devastated, right? As they all are. I mean, they go at each other tooth and nail in the House of Commons, and they have bitter differences. But on a day like this, you can tell what happened. The question period shuts down. People are in shock. It's not like they had not known he had been unwell, because he had been very unwell over the last couple of years, and many had wondered, well, really, Jim, do you want to keep doing this while you're fighting that? And but he wanted to, and he was focused on concerns about Canada's finances. So he was a remarkable guy on a lot of levels, and was a fun guy. And there were things, this is the kind of day, unfortunately, where you start to hear people talk about aspects of a person who, for most people, they never realized. Flaherty was a great lover of the arts, the fine arts. I'm from Stratford. My wife was at the Stratford Festival. And he'd pop up there more than a few times in a year, bring his family to see various shows at the festival, was a big supporter of the place. Unannounced, he just sort of arrived. It was not like with the big flotilla of cars and,
that you see
aides.
on the Hill.
Exactly. Yeah. Just a guy with his family who wanted to see a play, and he really had people impressed at a whole different level. But as Scott Bryson says, in the House, a tiger. He'd go after the opposition as much as he could. And we saw the reverse when he was in Toronto at Queen's Park. So this is going to be a person who's going to be missed on the national stage by, obviously those around him in his own party, but also those across the hall as well.
Yes, that's what it is everyone drops their political stripes, and
Exactly.
they remember the human being. And people have been saying that it's the Flaherty family. They're a family of politicians, and he was very committed to his work. Also, helping out with disabilities and working on investments there. And, you see the pain in a lot of people's faces because he just stepped down a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, isn't it? I mean, we don't know exactly what happened today.
Right.
But we have known he's been dealing with a difficult health situation. But isn't it so sad when you hear about these situations where somebody basically retires from a life that they have lived in this case, very publicly, but a life of politics. And then literally within days, I mean, he hadn't resigned his seat yet, or any of that hadn't happened yet, but literally within days of him departing that stage, he's gone. And it's just a shattering realization for everyone, his political friends and foes, to suddenly see somebody gone like that. It's hard to imagine that house without Jim Flaherty in it. It's, he was a pretty special guy and had all kinds of different qualities, from his physical stature, which he was very proud of, to his green tie that he wore almost all the time, certainly on all the big days, and to that smile. Listen, he loved a good time. He enjoyed a good party. But he was, finance minister longer than anybody else, with the one exception, in the history of the country. So that's quite an accomplishment.
And during a very difficult time as well.
Very difficult time. 2008, I remember talking to him after the budget at the beginning of 2008, where they had declared a surplus. They were all, very proud of themselves. And I said to him, the last question I asked him, it just sort of came out of nowhere. I said, can you foresee any situation where you would agree to allow a deficit? And he says, absolutely not. It's against my, all my beliefs. There's no way that I would ever allow a deficit. And then 6 months later, they were in a world economic crisis, and the only way out, in their view, was to spend big bucks, really big bucks. And suddenly, within a year, went from no deficit and the belief of having no deficit to the biggest deficit the country's ever had. It's quite a turnaround. But he had to do it. And there was a guy who was strong enough to believe that, you know what, this is the only way we can deal with the situation. In spite of everything I've ever said about deficits, we're going to have to go that way.
Strong enough and trusted by the Prime Minister to do just that. I mean, his relationship with the Prime Minister must have been quite close. Near the end.
Relationships between prime ministers and finance ministers are always a bit difficult. There can be a lot of disagreements there. We certainly saw it with Chrétien and Martin, not necessarily over the economy, but certainly over other issues, as we all know. But it goes back, in time between finance ministers and prime ministers, and I think there were difficult moments within this relationship as well. But at the end, they had their common goal, especially during that economic crisis of how to try and get out of it.
Any memories of Jim Flaherty that come to mind on a day?
Well, I guess the main one was that interview. But I can remember on budget nights and special nights around Parliament Hill, when I was in Ottawa, there were always a number of parties going on in different places. And I can remember one night, one of those. I can't remember what the actual event was, but he was at one of these parties in a hotel in downtown Ottawa. And people were invited to come up, and there he was at the door greeting people as they came in, just wanting them to have a good time, not interested in arguing politics, just talking about life, talking about hockey, talking about the arts.
Yeah.
Just being Jim.
Just being Jim. Well, Peter, thank you for sharing your
Thank
thoughts.
you.